Good morning to those of you who are signing in from the US. A good afternoon to our viewers signing in from Europe. And a good evening to all of you who are joining us from Asia. We have hundreds of participants from more than 20 countries around the world who have just signed in to our stream. And I believe that the number of participants are both a testament to the relevance of today's topic, how to market in turbulent times, but it also indicates how many of you who are currently working from home. My name is Klaus Mosbeck. I'm the club chair of Turbulent, live from our studios in Copenhagen, and in a minute I'll introduce our author, who is also live with us from Charleston, North Carolina. First of all, I would like to thank Harvard Business Review Press, who helps us bring the authors to you. Normally this would be an in-person event, but since authors are also stuck at home like you, we've moved the event online. So thank you also to our members of Turbulent who are signing in, and to the AVT community who are also joining us. And finally, a big thank you to the American Chamber of Commerce and all of their chapters across Europe who are signing in and watching us just now. We truly appreciate your interest in this topic and your support of these live streaming series. HBR's mission is to improve the management practices in a changing world. And well, the world is certainly changing. And our aim is to provide you with the inspiration on how to lead and manage through the pandemic. Before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping notes. The live streaming session is best enjoyed on either a desktop, laptop, or on your tablet. In case you want to engage in the chat, I urge you not to go full stream or full screen with the live streaming signal, or if you do, then exit once you have your questions ready. Matt's presentation will take roughly 25 minutes, after which we'll take your questions via the chat. And the session will be recorded and uploaded to our Vimeo account and made available to all of you after this session. Feel free to both share this content in your network and with your colleagues. And now for today's keynote. Today we're going to talk about how you should market your company in these turbulent times. And to talk about this topic, I've with me Mathew Sweezey, who is the Director of Market Strategy for one of the world's most innovative companies, according to Fast Company and Forbes. A researcher, thinker, award-winning marketer and writer, he is the author of Marketing Automation for Dummies and a keynote at conferences around the world. When Matt's not behind a podium or sifting through data, he routinely works with the world's largest and most well-respected brands, including UPS, Home Depot, and AT&T and Dell. His new book, The Context Marketing Revolution, How to Motivate Buyers in the Age of Infinite Media, is hot off the Harvard Business Review Press and was published just last week. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Klaus. Thank you guys so much for joining me. My name is Mathew Sweezey. I'm Director of Market Strategy at Salesforce and author of the recently published book, Context Marketing Revolution from Harvard Business. Now, what I'd like to talk with us about today is really how do we market in this new landscape? How do we reach context in this new world? And really what we need to think about are really two major things that have been going on. Obviously, there's what's currently happening in the marketplace, and we'll address that in just a second. But before we even got there, we need to realize that we entered into a new world. And I think that's one thing that we really must understand if we are going to execute efficiently moving forward. Now, what you can see on the screen is essentially a basic timeline. And I start off in 1970, but really what I want us to focus on is this time frame from 1996 to our current point in time in 2020. Now, we've all heard the phrase that content is king. And in fact, Bill Gates makes that statement in 1996. Now, while that was true, what we need to think about is how different today is from back then, just a few years ago. And let's just look at today in comparison to 2007. And what you'll see is it's a radically different environment. In fact, the rate of change that we're experiencing in our current point in time is unlike anything that we've ever experienced before. And it's not just that it's faster, and it's not just that it's more. This is a radically new environment. And I think we need to be very clear on that first, and then look at how do we effectively operate within this new environment. Now, if we put this all onto a basic slide and say, all right, let's look at today in comparison with the past, what we see is a few major things. First off, the number of connected devices is 12 times greater than it was just in 2007. And it's not just that there are more devices. Mobile connections, broadband connections. There's 30 times more broadband connections today than there were in 2007. When we look at how many people collaborate and interact in a daily basis in a new way, there are 1.6 billion daily active users on Facebook. That is 100 times more than there were in 2007. And that's just on one social channel in one day. And then we say, well, what are they all creating? Well, they're creating a lot of noise. And how much? Well, it's 500 times more today than it was just in 2007. And then we start to look at the underlying foundations of that media environment and we realize it's flipped. It no longer operates for the brands, it operates for the individuals and specifically for their personal context. Now, if we start to look forward just a little bit and we look at our current point in time in some new media channels, what we realize is this is not the same game that we used to play even a few years ago. And we must be really clear on this first. When we start to look at new media channels, let's just take TikTok, for example. What we realize is there's not even a timestamp on a TikTok post. Now, why would that be the case? Well, it's because that channel is not a chronological feed of information. It's a contextual experience. The same thing with Fortnite. If we look at social media, now that social commerce is a thing that allows for social media to become retailers, this is a very different world that we are operating in. And we also must be clear, right? There were massive changes to the consumer before we even got to the past month. And we need to really focus on this for a second. And I call this new consumer the post AI consumer. And here's why I call them the post AI consumer. Typically, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we internalize this from a brand standpoint and say, how can I leverage artificial intelligence to make my product better, to make my experience better, to make my company better? We very rarely ask the question, how has artificial intelligence changed the actual consumer and their desires? But I want us to think about this very critically for a quick second. Look at any digital channel and notice between you and the individual, there is a layer of artificial intelligence curating every moment for them, whether it's a social news feed, whether it's a website, whether it's an email inbox or a Google search. Between you and them, there is a layer of artificial intelligence making sure that they get the best and most contextual experience to that moment. And what has this done? Well, 84% of consumers already agree that the experience that you create is just as important as the products or services that you sell. Now, when we start to say, okay, they want an experience, and some people say, well, that's just a millennial thing. When we actually dig into the data, what we find is this is not a millennial thing. In fact, as you can see, baby boomers and millennials both desire experiences. Now, there's a slight difference. In fact, that difference is only a few percentage points. It's 14% difference between what a millennial desires and what a baby boomer desires. So this is not an age thing, right? This is also not a B2C versus B2B thing. Most brands would say, listen, these changes are only going to affect those business to consumer buyers. It's not going to affect my B2B buyer. And the reality is that this environment has actually changed B2B buyers more than B2C consumers. And what we look, you can see on the screen, right? Technology is redefining my behavior. 76% of B2B buyers would agree with that statement, where only 61% of B2C consumers would agree with that statement. My favorite is we'll pay more for a great experience. B2B buyers are more willing to pay more money for a better experience than their B2C counterparts. And the central question here is, why would that be the case? The easy answer is risk. There's more risk in a B2B buying decision, hence they are more affected in changes in that buying process. Now, when we really kind of boil all this down, this really fundamentally changes the very idea that we have of marketing in a lot of fundamental ways. And so I just want you to look at this one screen and think about this one basic concept of modern buyer behavior. And if we go into a store and look at a wall of products, and in this example, it's toothbrushes, the traditional idea of marketing would say, you know what, product packaging, this is going to have a major impact. Brand, we need to be top of mind. People need to remember who we are. But then I want you to ask this one basic question. How does the modern consumer operate? Given that they're a post AI consumer, and in this new world, what we find is something radically different. In fact, rather than picking up the package, they instead pick up their phone and they ask a question. And in this scenario, they are asking best toothbrush. In fact, what we find is the search term for best toothbrush is growing at a rate of 100% year over year. And it's not just that they ask one question, it's that takes them on a journey across 4 different websites and spans 70 seconds. All purchases are now considered purchases in the age of infinite media because they can be, right? So we really need to understand these aspects before we even talk about how do we address the current scenario, because this is only the beginning. When we start thinking about what will tomorrow look like and what will the next day after that look like, we need to be very clear. This is a radically different world foundationally. Ephemeral content is supposed to be the number one form that friends share content with them with each other on Facebook. That comes from Facebook, and that's projected to happen in 2020. When we start looking at voice and bots and messaging applications, what we find is that consumers are interacting with businesses radically more via these channels than we ever would have assumed. In fact, just in 2019, there were 20 billion messages. That was monthly messages sent between consumers and businesses just on the Facebook application Messenger. And that was a growth rate of 2.5 times more than the previous year. And then we start to add in new aspects of mixed reality, artificial intelligence, AR. We get a totally different concept of what the buyer experience is and what the new buyer journey looks like. And we must be really clear, this is the post AI buyer's journey. And we start to look at this in terms of retail. What we find is in the retail world, we start to see 1 in 10 purchases happening on the edge. That means on a website or on a destination that is not traditional media or traditional retailer or traditional brand website. We expect that to go to 1 in 5 by 2025. Right? This is a radically different world that we're operating in first and foremost. And then we add on what's just happened to the world. And if what we really understand is if we understand all these changes were happening underneath and going on, what's just happened is they were all pieces of tinder, just laying on top of each other. And yes, they would have been adopted at some point in time by everyone in the future. But what has just happened is we have just radically forced the world into a new baseline of understanding of what is possible for an experience, right? Just think about a couple very basic things. Zoom is now for everything. Populations that we never imagined would be on FaceTime or Zoom were forced into it overnight, right? We have new ways of collaborating. Weddings were going online and happening on Fortnite. Graduation parties were happening on Fortnite. People who would never, ever, ever be invited to these environments were brought into them. Work from home revolution, Slack sees 12.5 million new customers. What this is really saying is that tomorrow, consumers now have new habits. We are habitual people. This will shock us into new habits. That underlying foundation was there. This just brought us into that new world full force. So we really must understand in this new world what marketing tactics work. Well, what we've done is over the past 5 years, looked at really what are the differences between high performing marketing organizations and everyone else, and been able to really dial this into saying, what does a high performer do? And what we've been able to find is exactly what high performing marketing organizations are doing. And before I really dive into what that is, I want us to really understand the key points that we just made. We talked about this revolution, a context revolution. And this is not about content. This is not about social media. This is not about ad blocking or mobility. It's about a new world and what people derive from instant access and connectivity and openness, right? And what we find is brands that understand that, they have adopted a new idea of marketing. And this is the number one key difference between high performing marketing organizations and everyone else, is that they have full executive buy-in to a new idea of marketing, right? So if we start there and we say, okay, where do we go? How do we get to this new idea? So here's a couple of different paths that people will take. A lot of organizations will simply not embrace a new idea. They're just going to renovate the current idea that they have. Those are your laggards. What we also find is some people are able to evolve. They're able to move one step further. And this is where most of us are going to go. We're going to go from renovate to evolve. And we'll talk about what this looks like in a second. But just so we have a full idea of the scope of what is possible, we also must understand that we really need to go all the way to the right and transcend. And when we do, we can look at examples of companies that don't just break through, but dominate their marketplaces via a new idea of marketing. And this is just how radical a new idea of marketing can be. And let's just look at Tesla versus Mercedes-Benz, right? When we say a new idea, we mean a new role, scope, and function. Now, just look at the basic tale between Mercedes-Benz and Tesla. They both sell cars. In fact, when we start to break down the difference between what happens when Mercedes tries to sell a C-Class to how does Tesla sell a Model 3, it's radically different in terms of results and outcomes and tactics. In fact, ad cost per car, Mercedes spends $926 per car, Tesla spends six. By spending 1/150th of the same amount of advertising, they sold 3 times as many cars. The most surprising thing was the car did not exist when they sold 3 times as many of them. They beat the best luxury car manufacturer, not by being better at the same game, but by playing a different game, right? And so if we look at the underlying role that marketing plays in Tesla, they first go build the marketplace. They then work with that marketplace to co-create the product and sell the product. Then they build the product, and then they continue to create amazing experiences through the entire customer lifecycle. Very different than how Mercedes-Benz operates. And that is what a transcended idea of marketing looks like. But for most of us, we just need to evolve. We just need to embrace this idea of context and just understand really what this means and how do we do context marketing. And essentially, context marketing is very simple. It's 2 steps. First, it's we understand what the person is trying to solve and we help them accomplish the goal of the moment. We then build trust in that moment and parlay that trust to move them one step further on the customer journey. And that's really the basic idea of context marketing. When we look at this in terms of how does this play in a normal environment, what we see is a couple of basic aspects across the customer journey. One, brands work with their marketplaces, not on them. And a good example is Daniel Wellington, right? To get their brand out there, they don't create content, they work with their marketplace to create the content. And in fact, 99.5% of all posts talking about this brand, who is a startup watch brand and now sells $200 million of watches, is created by their marketplace. Lego had a problem. People were coming to their website and leaving and not buying product. Traditional marketing logic would say deploy a retargeting campaign. Instead, what they did is they created a chatbot that said, listen, let's have a conversation with Ralph, the perfect gift buying bot. He will help you find the perfect gift, because what was the problem is there was too many options and they didn't know what the right gift was. So by creating a bot to help them pick the right gift, they honestly created one of the best marketing programs that I've ever seen come out of this company. And what they did is they sell the average order size through the bot was twice the average order size on the website. And the bot accounts for 25% of all online holiday sales in 2017. IKEA has a radically different idea of the experience and buys TaskRabbit, a delivery service that helps people take the product home and even assemble the product. And then even in advocacy, right? There's lots of different examples. But let's just really quickly touch on what does context mean. And there's 5 elements. We must be available to an individual when they want that moment. It has to be on their terms. We must make sure we get permission to serve them this experience. It's always better if we ask and they ask for that experience. It must be personal and not personalized, but how personal can we deliver it? Fourth, it must be authentic. And 5, it really must be purposeful. Now, with that as a baseline understanding of why we must focus on context marketing, what is context marketing? Let's look at some examples of how this is currently playing out in the current marketplace. First, we must make sure we have information available. Starbucks has done an amazing job at this. In fact, they've created a central portal for all of their customers to go and to find information. But what's really critical about this is a couple of basic things. One, it tells them when that information was last updated. It gives them a central source of information. We must do this not only for our customers, but also all other stakeholders in our business. This means both employees as well as vendors and other partners. Because what we find is those brands that excel at stakeholder continuity have the best and quickest rebound from any type of a crisis, because you need a deep connection with your partners to survive and to excel. You also then must have this information coming in from your customers. They are going to have different needs. Their lives have been uprooted and changed. If we are not digging in to find out what those new needs are, there is no way we're going to be able to meet them in context of those needs and help them solve those problems. So, what are a couple of strategies that you can implement for stakeholder continuity? There's three basic ones. Internally, you need to operate specifically with daily stand ups. This is an agile practice where each day you have a quick meeting. It's no longer than 5 minutes, and you answer three things, and that's it. You answer, what did you do yesterday? What are you working on today? And are there any roadblocks in your way to accomplishing that? That thing gets moved all the way up the chain, and the goal is to remove roadblocks as quickly as possible to get things moving as fast as they can be. Next is daily and weekly calls. Make sure you are having daily and weekly calls, not only with your customers, but also all other stakeholders in your business. This information then needs to be passed into internal data feeds. You need to make sure everyone in your organization knows how the customer is changing, what the marketplace is saying, right? This is your role as a marketer to bring this into the organization so everyone can operate from the same playing card. Next is when we then create new efforts, we must make sure that those efforts are focused on empathetic goals, right? We must help people. And you can see great examples. What we're doing right now at Salesforce is we've created a new series called Leading Through Change, where we're connecting all of the best thought leaders that we can find to help our customers understand what they should be doing and how they should be moving forward. We're not telling you what you need to buy. We're not saying this is what you should be doing. We're helping you with the current problem. That is reaching people in context. Now, let's specifically talk about some things that we probably shouldn't be doing, right? We have large advertising budgets that should be going out. Pull those back. We don't need to be telling people what they should be doing. We need to double down on helping our stakeholders survive. Really great examples, Molson Coors and Boston Beer Company. Both are doing buyback programs, right? All of their vendors who sell their product are shut down. So they're splitting all of the cost and buying back all of that product from their vendors, right? So we need to find ways that we can help our stakeholders and build those deep relationships. Next, let's talk about how do we engage with our audience in context. And when we talked about the element of context that is personal, we really need to find ways that we can connect people together. Human to human is the apex of the new environment. So one of the things that we were able to do is we had to pivot an event. So a lot of you may be thinking about how do we pivot events from a physical event to a virtual event? Well, we had to do that with one of our largest events in Australia. It's a 5,000 person event. And within 10 days, we had to pivot it to a fully virtual event. And one of the big things that we were able to do is we created watch parties where we gave sales a new reason to reach out because they were now going to create parties inside of our customers' office places and then bring the event to them, right? Another really good way is Australian Red Cross. During the Australian wildfires, they reached out to their audience and said, rather than us going to an agency to make all the ads, why don't you guys help us make ads and share them out to your audience, right? So we need to find ways to work with our audience. There's a couple of other really easy ways that we can think about these things. These are two great examples that I've seen recently. Noom, they're a nutritional supplement like an electrolyte, like a Gatorade or a Powerade, but in a tablet form. And what they realize is there is a lot of people who need help. They need hydration, and those are specifically the care workers giving care to sick people. So they've created packages where they're sending packages to those individuals. Lessonly did a couple of amazing things. One is they've also created care packages and sent out to all their customers and prospects. Before they did that, they took their entire content team and said, make a coloring book. Because what's the context of a lot of the problems that their customers are facing? They're working from home and trying to figure out how do I work from home and keep my kids off my back at the same time? Lessonly said, let me take care of that for you for an hour. And they created a coloring book that their people could print out right there at home and then give to their children for something to do for an hour. We must really find ways to meet these people in context. We could take these ideas and scale them in lots of different ways. Just simply think about what your community has and what you have and new ways of connecting them together, right? A hospital has two sides, right? They've got their community, and lots of people have children and have ways they say, we don't know what to do with them. Hospitals have lots of sick patients and overworked staff who need support. Let's find ways to connect these things together rather than the hospital trying to tell the community about where they are and what they can do. Actually go in there and start doing that work. That is contextual marketing and things that we can think about and ways that we can operate. Now, another conversation we really need to think about right now is moving forward. How do we move forward from here, and what does that look like? When we look at the data and say, who rebounds best from major crisis, and what are the tactics that they put in place during times of radical change, and what wins? what we find, this comes from Harvard Business, we find a progressive approach. And what we find is people that follow progressive approaches have the best and quickest and strongest recovery. So, what does that mean? Well, it really means there are a couple of keys that we must have. And there's really four. I had a mistype, I typed in five. We already talked about internal alignment, right? Which is where we need to create that centralized data feed to make sure that everyone knows the same information, that all information going out to the marketplace is consistent. We also talked about excelling at stakeholder continuity, but we now need to talk about investment and strategic efforts. What we find is the brands that really focus on investing in strategic efforts during this point in time have the quickest and fastest recovery. And that really means three things. One, yes, we need to cut back expenses, but let's be careful about where we cut those expenses back. Those need to come from operational efficiencies. If we cut people at a current point in time like this, what we find is when we need to then ramp back up, it takes a very long time to find people, takes a very long time to train them, specifically during the time that we need them most. So if you can try not to cut people, don't cut people. Technology. If there are key initiatives that you've been wanting to do, and right now I'd say any key initiative focused on delivering a better experience is where you need to invest now. And finally, is don't be afraid to still try to enter new markets and products. But the caveat on all of this is don't expect massive returns right now, right? You have to reset your goals. The returns are going to be very small in anything that you do currently. But where they're going to pay dividends is in a faster and quicker recovery. The next is we must really have rapid experimentation. And there's a great rule of thumb. It's the 80-20 rule of thumb, where essentially 80% of your current time is spent on focusing and creating new ideas, right? Leave the things that you know that work, leave them and let them run, right? And spend about 80% of your advertising budget and your marketing execution budget on those things that you know are going to work right now. The remaining 20%, then use that for testing and then roll those learnings back into the experiments that you've been running. A couple of other things that we really need to focus on, like I said, is double down on the experience because that is what people are going to want coming out of this. If anything, we need to realize that the world after this, people are going to understand a new level of experience that is possible. Everyone will understand that. So what we're seeing is companies like Chipotle, they're doubling down on things that they've known were going to be a big deal. They knew order from home was going to be massive. In fact, it accounted for $1 billion in sales last year. So what are they doing right now? They're doubling down on those capabilities and they're focusing on safety in those moments, right? And then we need to think about one other aspect of moving forward, and that is a new idea of empathy in this new world. We must realize that consumers are going to experience lots of things all the time, right? Think about how much content they are experiencing on a daily basis. Empathy doesn't just mean the tone that you use. It means what you were creating and how often you were creating it. Really good example, Delta. I'm a frequent flyer on Delta. And you know what really irritates me is every time that I sit down on a plane, which is just about every week, what I have to see is the same video. That's very frustrating to me. That's not very empathetic to me as a customer, making me watch the exact same thing over and over and over. So what has Delta done? They have a new video every month. So what we must realize is this is going to move us into a new world where we must think differently about content and about programs. We're going to move into a world of what I'm going to call fast advertising and fast content, where you're going to need to have to create different versions because if a person sees the same version 3 times, they're tone deaf. There's no way you're going to reach them again. So we need to think about empathy in a new way moving forward and must be empathetic to the world and the experience that they're going to be having. Let me wrap this up with a couple conclusions, and then we can turn it over to questions and answers. The first thing we must realize is that this current point in time is really coalescing with a radical change in the possibility of experiences. This was happening underneath the surface. And really what this current point in time is just bringing this to the light. And this really must just drive and focus us all on this idea of experiences. And what we see is it's not just any experience. We must really transition this idea of what marketing means inside of our organization. Those high performers, they operate with a new idea of marketing. We must focus on transcending this idea of marketing and not just finding new ways to do the same old things. This is a totally different world. The consumers are totally different and they are demanding different things. So if we just focus on these 5 elements of context, this will guide us to making sure that the experiences that we create not only resonate, but break through and drive the engagements that we want. And those elements are make sure that's available. Make sure that we focus on permission. Make sure that when we think about personal, it's not how personalized do we make it, it's how personal can we deliver it. And making sure that we are authentic in those experiences, that we are focusing on empathy, and that really they are focused on something greater than just our product, that we are helping them solve some other aspect and problem in their life. And with that, I want to say, guys, thank you so much for listening. And now we'll turn it over to questions.
Thank you, Matt, for some truly inspiring words. A lot of food for thought. In case you want to engage in this session, we have a chat function. So if you have your screen on the live stream signal on a full screen mode, please exit that now and start entering your questions in the box to your right, on the right-hand side of the screen. We already have quite a few questions lined up. The first one is from Oliver Frey. He asks, any tips for small and medium-sized enterprises? So this is all fine and good if you have, let's say, $1 billion or $1 million marketing budget. But what if you're a small company? Say if you have only 5,000 to 10,000 yearly marketing budget, Isaac Garfunkel asks.
Yeah, think about a couple of basic things that you can do. You're going to need to continue to communicate with your marketplace. So think about communicating by doing one of a couple of things. Is there a way that you can connect and bring people together? Is there a way that you can help inform them on things that they need information on? Get them information they may not be getting. Is there a way that you can find some way to support them in their current state? Is there a way that you can teach them something new? Possibly you could entertain them in some way, shape, or form via your marketing, or simply provide a new way or service that helps them accomplish a goal that they may have. So really, anyone can do one of those things. And if you can focus on doing one of those things, you'll be able to continue communicating with your marketplace, and that can scale to any size business, small or large.
In your talk, you mentioned Lego yourself. It's a Danish company, so I think it's interesting to highlight that as well. Of course, they have deep pockets to cover the losses that they're currently experiencing in whether their branches, the theme parks, which is also a great indication that maybe one side of your business is experiencing issues, but maybe it's a totally different issue for another part of your company. So a question from the chat from Thomas is, how do you see large in-person experiences like theme parks, it could be the Legoland, existing in a post-COVID-19 world? Can they sustain a business model based on large gatherings of people using physical equipment on site? It's a lot of real estate and equipment to pay for.
Yeah, so this is a great question. What's going to happen to physical events in the post-COVID world? So there's a couple of basic things that we understand are going to happen. One is people's appetite for virtual events is going to be higher. It's just not that their appetite is going to be higher, it's that the fear of change has already been removed because they've already, one, had to download some type of virtual application, two, use said virtual application, and three, have been doing so on a daily basis. Now that becomes a habit, right? So people will be more likely to use virtual experiences. Will there ever be a replacement for physical? No, physical has a value unto itself that virtual can't provide, right? So each of them have a different value for the individual in the moment. And as long as we understand what the core value that we're trying to solve is, we will be able to then solve for that. So I think a lot of times, theme parks, they will come back, and there'll probably be a surge for theme parks coming back after this. Quite honestly, people being pent up, wanting to get out, they're going to need somewhere to go. So we just need to think about that in terms of how will those experiences evolve. They will definitely be more virtual moving forward. We've already seen that trend starting to happen before this.
We have a question from Liliana who asks, what would be some good ways to inject concerns about environment and sustainability in our solutions for moving forward?
Yeah, so I would say just go back to, if you want to talk about any other topic, go back to those words, right? Connect, inform, support, teach, entertain, provide. If there's a way that you can wrap that messaging around in one of those ways, whether that you can help entertain people via those concepts, like the example with the coloring book, right? You could definitely combine those two methods and entertain and provide that education for some other type of method that you wanted to get, and some other type of message that you wanted to get out at this current point in time. So I'd say try to combine those two things together.
We have a couple of questions about what to do as a marketer if your budget is being cut. What do you say to your chief financial officer that says, well, it's downsizing across the board, we need to save? What do you say as a marketer to that?
Yeah, there's two things. One is we need to have the conversation, which is why we ended the presentation with what do we do next? How do we prepare for recovery? Because I think what we looked at from the 2008 financial crisis, what Harvard found was the organizations that had the fastest recovery in terms of 2x the recovery of other organizations. They cut, but they were able to maintain a couple of basic things. They maintained as much staff as possible inside the marketing organization. And also they invested in those key initiatives still, right? So if you're trying to find new ways to have better experiences, if you were thinking about technology pieces that would allow you to do that, you still need to follow those paths down because those are going to be radically important when we start to make this turn back up. But the reality is we're all going to have to sacrifice in some way, shape, or form. So if we have to take a cut, where do we take that cut? I'd say take it right out of the advertising budget. That's what we see most people doing, and then redeploying that other places. So that's kind of what I would look at in the conversations that I would have.
We have a question from and a comment from China. Yu Chan says, I came out of the COVID-19 crisis from China, and you're right, the people and technology come first. We are in a manufacturing industry and cash flow is hard. Do you have any suggestions regards to new client relations in marketing for manufacturing?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing that we should focus on is personal relationships and personal connections. I think that's going to be the best way to reach people. So rather than thinking about how do we scale via mass messaging, thinking about redeploying sales and marketing targets to the highest and most valued prospects and customers, and finding ways to really be hyper personal with those individuals to get them back into the fold and get that revenue into the organization and up as quickly as possible. So I think it's a redeployment of targets, and then the tactics will be as personal as we can get them, right? You can look at using your marketplace to do that, whether that's influencer, employee advocacy, using your advocates, but personal human-to-human relationships is where I would focus.
Then we have a question from Klaus Funnersbeck, who asks, what role does PR play in context marketing? And with PR, I mean media that are the A-level communications channels for your business.
Yeah, so there's, in terms of context marketing, in terms of PR's role in it, we really need to think about this in two ways, right? There's large air cover around when we say share of conversation, but then there's also share of journey, right? So if we look at share of conversation and share of journey, they don't happen to the individual at the same time, right? So let me kind of break this down real simply. If you hear a message, you're going on your normal day and you open up your news feed and you see articles, right? You're just simply looking to entertain, engage, learn. That's your daily habit. It's a different habit when you are actively investigating a product that you want to purchase, right? That is an actual journey that you're going down. So PR must do both. They must provide air cover so that people know who we are, must engage with them, have some type of context of what our platform is, and have some type of relationship from us. But we also must make sure that they also understand the importance of the journey and are working and focusing on key words and making sure that there's evergreen content that lives all the way across the journey and are maintaining and watching that journey. So we know where we need to be focused on, where we need to be putting our efforts. So it's not all in major A-list publications. We combine that and say we make sure that it's a combination of both share of conversation from a large scale as well as share of journey from a very specific persona-based questions along where they're going to be going on their journey.
All right. Thank you so much, Matt, for all your interesting thoughts. Your book is hot off the press from Harvard Business Review, and you can purchase it both in our store online and also on Amazon. I don't know if your local bookstore is actually open, but otherwise I'm sure that we can send it to you. Thank you so much. And maybe, Matt, you'll have time just to answer some of the questions in the chat if you stay on just a bit. But for the rest of you, I hope to see you again in 2 weeks for yet another HBR Live session. And the invitation to those sessions will be sent out to you by your local host, whether it be Totalkluben, AVT, or the American Chamber of Commerce. You're also welcome to sign up for our newsletter right here on the website, in case you're interested in receiving more Harvard Business Review related content. We will upload this presentation to our public Vimeo channel in a couple of hours. And until then, I wish you all great health. Thank you.